You're right. We can't stand up to this as a citizen, right? Even as a small business owner, if Google pings me and says that a story, in their opinion, was inappropriate, or even if it was something about hydroxychloroquine, I remember when that came up, and they were like pinging everybody, even if it was just basic news that even the Associated Press was writing about. But if you were a conservative, they would ping your website and they would warn you that if you didn't remove the story, and this has happened once with that. It also happened with a story that we did on anti-Semitism, which was incredible because we were exposing anti-Semitism in New York and a family that had big tragedy. But Google pinged us, said if we didn't remove the stories, that we would lose our advertising. So basically, they control the platform, they control the advertising, and they have the pockets. Regular folks or small business owners do not have the pockets to fight Google.
Yeah, and what we've seen and what we've alleged is that if you look at Google's pattern, anytime entity has maybe become a threat to them or could compete against them, they've essentially bought them out or quashed them. And so, you look at things like YouTube, owned by Google now. You look at Fitbit or, some of these fitness apps owned by Google. And so what ends up happening is that even when people like myself, for example, I don't use Google search. I use Firefox, or, I use that browser, different search engine, different browser. And it doesn't matter though, because if you have any of those apps, even Waze now is owned by Google. And so they have all these different ways of tracking you, collecting information about you, and then they monetize it. Because let make no mistake about it, Google is not really a tech company anymore. They're an advertising company. And, there's been lawsuits related to how they control the advertising market. Like just this week in the EU, there's a lawsuit to get how they, both their buyers and sellers, and they manipulate, allegedly, manipulate, advertising and, favor the Google folks versus the non-Google folks. We've seen that. And we've heard that even with, other competitors of them when it comes to like apps like, Yelp that may be providing, services or ways to get to a restaurant. And then if you're a Google favored, maybe you get disfavored and you get pushed 2 or 3 pages down. So there's all these things that, are concerning from a competitive point of view, Sarah. But the other thing, and this is the important thing, and you alluded to this right at the beginning, is human beings, we have dignity. And we have, I believe we, as Madison used to talk about, that we have not only rights in our property, but property in our rights. And so it just seems to me that if Google is not only going to collect all this information, monetize it, and as you allude to, even manipulate you and maybe nudge you and send you certain feeds and not feeds, if they're going to do all that, one is consumers, people need to know what they're doing, why they're doing it, and ultimately, I think we have a property right. We have become, human beings have become the commodity for some of these tech companies like Google. So, if people are buying and selling oil on the market, or people are buying and selling real estate or whatever, we know buyer and the seller reach an agreement and they say, hey, it's worth X, Y, and Z, and the market kind of determines that. So if Google is going to collect all this information without my permission, if they're going to build profiles, if they're going to monetize it, if they're going to manipulate me, they should have to tell us that as consumers, as human beings. And then they should say to you, okay, Mark, if you want to, get these ads, or if you want to get these stories, or we're going to use this stuff to try to steer you in a certain way, it is worth X amount of dollars to you. And I think that's the important thing, is we need to make sure that these companies like Google are providing full and fair disclosure. And we know from our lawsuit in state court, Google has tried to make sure it's sealed. They've tried to have stuff not open to the public. And even recently in our filings, we show that Google internally, we've had some internal documents now that we've been able to release, that Google themselves, people that there were saying, oh my goodness, we don't want this on the front page of the New York Times.
Absolutely.
Oh my gosh, it's impossible to turn off these tracking things. And it's impossible. I'm sorry, just one last thing. We read information that for the average person to try to opt out, to not have all them tracking all this stuff, it would require the equivalent of like a college degree and about 75 minutes of time to do all that. So they have made it virtually impossible for them not to collect as much information about you, where you go, how long you go there, what doctors you're at, what you buy online, all that stuff. So it's not just about when you're at the shoe store giving you ads for shoes. It's about knowing, they know more about you than your spouse does, and they know more about where you're going than a travel agent does. I mean, they have all this information, and then they're able, through their IA, through their artificial intelligence, to essentially manipulate and control you. And that's the part that should be dangerous. It's very Orwellian.